One of the most important steps of creating a documentary film is to be intentional about your story's form and visual style from the very beginning. And to do that, you need to understand what elements are at your disposal to choose from. So in this video, I'm going to break down the 6 different types of documentary footage, the purpose each one serves from a narrative perspective, technical considerations you'll need to make to execute each one at a high level, and what you stand to lose if you rely on any given type too much. And stick around for the end where I will recommend a documentary that utilizes each visual style at the highest level so that you can take your research beyond this video. Hey everyone, if you're new here, my name is Austin Meyer. I'm a documentary filmmaker, National Geographic Explorer, and on this channel I share the field-tested skills, mindsets, and lessons that have helped me on my journey as a documentary filmmaker. I am currently at the very early stages of a short documentary I'm directing about people who dedicate their lives to protecting chickens. As I developed the concept, I applied for some grant funding from an animal rights media outlet that I contribute to, and after getting it, I'm now moving into pre-production. Pre-production is this window it's a chance for you to dream, to imagine, what could this project be like? What could it look like? What could it feel like? And as I dream about my project, one of the first things that I do is I think about what types of footage I'll be using. I think about what kind of footage I'll need to rely on based on the story's constraints. Then I'll also think about how I can add additional types of footage to make the story as dynamic as possible. Think about it like this. It's like the full film is a painting, and types of footage are different colors on the palette. Without understanding the 6 types of footage in a documentary film, you will be leaving so much color or art on the table. So let's get into them. The first type of footage that you will find in many documentaries is the interview. Interviews provide direct personal testimony from film participants that convey key information. It conveys thoughts, opinions. Interviews give participants a chance to tell their experiences directly to the audience, which can help provide our films with a strong sense of both authenticity and authority. They're also a powerful alternative to the more impersonal narration, the kind of voice of God narration style that is commonly found in documentaries on PBS Frontline, HBO Sports, and Ken Burns' historical films.
30th, 2024. Protesters condemning the war in Gaza had barricaded themselves in a building at Columbia University.
The moment you decide to use interviews in your project, you will be confronted with a number of choices that will strongly impact the style of your documentary. First, an interview can be formal or informal. In formal interviews, the interviewee sits or stands at a specific location for the duration of the interview. The background is carefully chosen to provide context for the story, and you can control elements like lighting and audio conditions. You can opt for your interviewee to look directly into the camera, which is a popular style these days that creates the feeling of speaking directly to the audience, or you can go with the more traditional off-camera interview, which can feel more conversational. The main advantage of a formal interview is that you can control the environment. You can dig deep on questions for a long time, and the formality of the setup can sometimes bring out participants' A-game. They feel the lights, camera, action, and bring their focus and energy to that moment. However, the risk of this choice is that relying too much on formal interviews can make the film feel static, like the audience is being lectured at by too many talking heads. So instead, you may opt for more informal interviews. In these, the interviewee goes about their normal daily tasks while also answering questions. You can interview your subject while they are driving, drawing, looking at photo albums, or whatever they're doing. In these situations, you will have less control over the environment, lighting, and audio, but you might document a more dynamic and natural performance. I say performance in quotes there. A lot of people, especially if they aren't trained public speakers or academics, feel much more comfortable offering honest and vulnerable opinions if everything is less formal. If there aren't big lights and mics, and if they can be doing a task simultaneously where their eyes can wander instead of making direct eye contact. I like to think of it like how sometimes I will have a deeper connection with friends if we're talking while on a walk than I do while I'm sitting on the couch with them. Like there's something about not making direct eye contact and when your body is moving that allows some people to open up. Interviews are very useful, but you should also know the pitfalls of leaning on them too hard. Too many interviews can cause confusion. Tonally, it can start to feel like a one-dimensional lecture. But most importantly, we have a visual medium where we can show. You know the old saying, show, don't tell, right? Showing is almost always more powerful. So it's a trade-off. The more time you spend telling, the less time you can spend showing. The second type of footage is B-roll. The term B-roll originates from the early days of film when editors inserted supplemental footage, or B-roll, into the main footage, or A-roll, to hide visible lines where two pieces of film were joined. Today, B-roll describes all of the footage that isn't the main action. Typically, B-roll shots don't include dialogue between characters and are used to create a mood or convey information. For example, establishing shots of a location, detailed close-ups of an item, or me wearing a tie-dye sweatshirt filming out in Golden Gate Park. And yes, I know I need to film some more B-roll for the channel. B-roll is narratively useful because when used in combination with interviews, often referred to as A-roll, it adds visual variety while also illustrating what is being talked about. And that's why if you know you're going to use a lot of B-roll sequences in your film, one of the things you need to think about is the order of operations between your A-roll interviews and your B-roll filming. If you film your interview first, then you can film B-roll that maps to what was talked about during the interview. Alternatively, if you film B-roll first, then you can ask questions in the interview that map to the B-roll you know you already have in the bag. Or you might opt for what some productions like Chef's Table do. Chef's Table is a Netflix documentary series in which every episode they dig deep and look at the personal journey of a chef and what they've gone through. For these 53-minute episodes, it's normal for their production team to spend 10 hours interviewing the chef who they profile. But here's the thing. They do an interview at the beginning of production, film their B-roll, and then do an interview again at the end of production. In this way, they can get the best of both worlds, filming to sound bites they know they already have, and also asking for sound bites for shots they filmed that worked out really well. So what can go wrong if you rely too much on B-roll? Well, oftentimes people abuse B-roll with rapid fire back-to-back cuts. Instead, use B-roll as a way to pace a story and give the information on screen a little time to settle in with the viewer. With the use of B-roll, you can let voiceover end while continuing the B-roll for a few moments so that the viewer can breathe and take a mental break. Another thing to be aware of is that too much B-roll can feel staged and distant. For added authenticity and closer proximity, consider using the third type of documentary footage, which is scenes. I consider scenes to be sequences in which there are exchanges of dialogue between characters and/or a series of shots that are strung together to walk someone through an action. For example, instead of interviewing someone talking about how important it is to have dinner with their family and then layering over some B-roll of the family having dinner, a scene would just be a sequence of the family actually having dinner, filming them actually having dinner. And you capturing natural in-the-moment dialogue and sound bites that illustrate how important it is for the family to have dinner together. The goal of a scene is to make the audience feel like they're there, right there in the moment, experiencing it firsthand. And to also get us closer to the truth of people and their stories. When I think about documenting scenes, I like to study and learn from the tradition of verite filmmaking. Cinema verite at its core means truthful cinema and is a style of filmmaking that tries to understand the truth of a situation by following the people that live that truth. This style of filmmaking was developed in France in the late 50s and early 60s and still heavily influences the documentary world today. In fact, it's the type of filmmaking that I not only enjoy watching the most, but also working on myself. And so when I think of scenes, I think of filming sequences that speak for themselves. They don't need any narration, no interviews or text overlays. Scenes speak for themselves, dropping viewers into a moment in time in which characters are on camera in a way that is not performative, but honest to their real lives. The challenge you should be aware of with filming scenes is that because you lack control, you may have much higher shoot ratios. Or in other words, you may shoot a ton of footage to just use like a tiny bit of that in the final cut. If you're working on small budget projects with tight timelines, that can be challenging. Of course, you can always plan out what scenes you'll capture, but even then, ratios will likely be higher. And if you want to go full verite style scenes, I hope you're patient. For context, Matthew Heinemann's 94-minute verite film Retrograde, he got to the edit room with 1,300 hours of footage. The fourth type of documentary footage is archival footage. Archival footage refers to pre-existing video footage, photographs, memorabilia that has historical relevance and can be used in the current production. This footage can come from a variety of sources, including news agencies, government agencies, private collections, individuals. One of the main roles of archival footage in documentary filmmaking is to provide a historical context for the film. By using archival footage, filmmakers can illustrate the events and circumstances that have shaped the world we live in today. This can be especially powerful when used in conjunction with contemporary stories and interviews, as it can help to give a greater understanding of the larger historical story at play. When choosing to use archival material in your film, you should think through 3 different approaches. The first is finding the story in an existing archive. An example of this is the recent Oscar winner Summer of Soul, which documents the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival. In 2003, film archivist Joe Lauro discovered the footage of Summer of Soul, which had been stored in a basement for almost 50 years. The existing archive became almost the entire film and story. The second approach is to find archives that support a story you want to tell. An example of this is the 2020 documentary about the disability rights movement, Crip Camp. This story dug into the archives of a particular camp for disabled youth and connected it to the disability rights movement as a whole. And the third approach is to use found footage from living subjects, like the use of archival material in the movie Minding the Gap, which uses kind of like home movies to expand the sense of time and scope of the story. Archival footage is powerful, and when used correctly, it helps a specific and of-the-moment story feel universal and timeless. However, be prepared to put in the work. Archival films require expert sleuthing. You may have to make hundreds of calls, read dozens of books, check picture credits, search film archives, search stock footage libraries and internet archives for stock shots and videos. You'll need to be tenacious in your pursuit of materials to make your film, digitizing, downloading images as you go. During the production of The Civil War, a documentary by Ken Burns, he spent 6 weeks straight in the paper print collection at the Library of Congress sleuthing, so we got our work cut out for us. The 5th type of documentary footage is reenactment. Reenactment is a technique used to depict historical events where there's not available archival assets. Reenactments can serve various purposes. They can be illustrative, self-reflecting, historical, yet they always have one common attribute, and that's that they present a fictionalized version of reality. Reenactments in documentaries, they provoke a lot of questions. They open up debates about our relationship to truth, lies, memory, and fantasy. 2 examples for you to get a sense of what I mean by illustrative reenactments and self-reflective reenactments are The Rescue, which is about the Thai cave rescue. Reenactments were used to illustrate the rescue where there were no cameras to film. In the movie, the directors filmed reenactments using a cave set submerged in a water tank. They carefully scripted scenarios using the actual divers who were involved in the rescue and methodically went through different moments from that rescue to illustrative, its chain of events. The self-reflective reenactment can be found in the film The Act of Killing, which depicts the organizers and executors of Indonesian mass killings of the 1960s who were asked to describe and reenact their experiences of assassinations. There, the filmmakers follow the protagonist from one place to another while they enthusiastically recall and demonstrate their methods of execution. Using the killer's warped, self-reflecting perspective to guide the documentary is a rhetorical strategy to get viewers thinking about subjectivity and the malleability of truth. I will warn you, reenactments are very hard. Done effectively, they can be memorable, but if they come off cheesy and unrealistic, which so many do, they can completely take viewers out of your story. And the final type of documentary footage that I want to touch on today is visualization. Visualizations can be graphics, animations, artistic renderings. These are all making docs more accessible to a wider audience and allowing filmmakers to dramatize scenes that can't be shown with footage. And I would say that animation sits at a similar place as reenactments in terms of its narrative function. Similar to reenactments, animations underscore that documentary filmmaking is a subjective process. Whether it is being used to visualize emotions or to depict a historical event, animations will always make an audience aware that what they're seeing is not necessarily the truth. So if you're going to use animations or artistic renderings, I urge you to reflect on whether that form reflects the message or story you're trying to tell. Artistic renderings have an amazing ability to illustrate that which cannot typically be illustrated. to lead viewers towards an emotional truth. However, it is a very demanding and expensive form. So for most documentaries that need to be budget conscious, you're almost always going to opt to put a subject on camera. As I'm about to share, there is one movie you should check out if you want to see this technique used at the highest level. But for the documentary recommendations, let's start back at the top and then work our way forward. For a film that uses interviews very effectively, check out Won't You Be My Neighbor? For one that uses a lot of great B-roll, 14 Peaks. For a documentary that has compelling scenes, Minding the Gap. My archival pick is Fire of Love. And my recommendation for reenactments is The Act of Killing. And for artistic renderings, check out the movie Flee. My hope with all of this information is that you can start to get a better grip on the types of footage at your disposal as you set off to make your next documentary project, because there's a lot of potential here, a lot of colors on our palette. So we just need to keep studying and practicing in order to find how to balance, how to mix, how to mingle all of those types of footage in order to make the most and make the best documentaries that we can. Because almost all of the ones that you probably are drawn to, that are your favorite documentaries you've ever seen, have a mix of so many of the forms that I just talked about today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider sharing it with a friend or colleague who also enjoys documentary filmmaking. I would be so grateful for that. I'll see you next week back here. Until then, go out and tell some stories.